masonry skill rose high enough while doing that, he'd happily reassign those people to the wall-building crew as well. Now I just have to figure out how to enjoy myself again. I have to remember it's a game and not get quite so tied up with everything, Eddie thought. And I know just how to start. Eddie gave a piercing whistle. While he waited, he glanced at the houses they'd completed earlier today. They'd almost finished building the ones with sites to the north of the crossroads. There were quite a few sites to the south of it now, though, although not nearly as many as to the north. Another couple of days, and their construction efforts would have to be directed to the other side of the crossroads, since they'd have finished completing all the houses to the north. He was distracted and, as a result, didn't notice the rather large bobcat sneaking up on him. The first thing he knew of Lucky's arrival was when she pounced against his back, sending him sprawling forwards in the dirt. "Lucky," he said indignantly, "what was that for? I was whistling to see if you wanted to go hunting with me." The bobcat looked slightly repentant, but still chuffed at him. Eddie knew he'd been ignoring her for a couple of days again. Not entirely, but not dedicating any time specifically for her either. "Yeah, sorry, but don't do that, okay? I called you to hunt, so would you like to go with me? We can either go rabbit hunting or rat hunting, but if we go for rats, I'll collect branches for arrows also." Lucky sat down on her haunches and her head swiveled, staring first in the direction of the rat woods and then at the lightly forested area where they normally hunted for bunnies. Finally, she stood and started trotting towards the rat woods. "Rats it is, I guess," Eddie said. "Hey, wait a second, Lucky, wait for me!" The bobcat was picking up speed when Eddie broke into a trot trying to catch up to her. By the time they got back to the inn later in the day, Eddie had enough branches for another 50 or more arrows added to the stack he already had in his inventory. Whenever he had a few minutes and full mana, he'd make another arcing arrow, still afraid to try his frostbite spell in the conjunction. At its current cost, it would lay him out hard and for a long time, because of the modified cost of attack spells used with the conjunction skill. He had more than 100 finished arrows of the normal type with no enhancing spell. His boyer and fletching skill had gone up another point as he made his stash. He also had 40 of the arcing arrows, as making 2 or 3 a day since he'd figured out how to do it had added up quickly. He walked into the inn, feeling good from the time he'd spent with Lucky. She'd been happy to go hunting in the ratwoods with him. He hadn't had a problem with it, until she'd led him right into a rat nest, intentionally as far as he could tell. The two of them had managed to clear it, though Eddie got a bit banged up in the process. Lucky was mostly fine after the fight. The handful of coins hadn't been enough for the aggravation, but he'd collected them anyhow. He figured that if he'd gone through the pain and trouble of clearing them, then he wanted the reward for it. "I've got to get myself some new armor," he thought. "And since we've got a leather worker now, and I've got Paul building the tannery also, that means it's time to get some cows, or at least the local equivalent. Real leather might allow me to upgrade all my accessory armor pieces to match my tunic. Admittedly, they won't be enchanted studded leather like the tunic is, but even just normal studded would be a big upgrade to my armor, I bet." He was still wearing crappy goblin pieces in most of his non-tunic slots. Although the stamina-enhancing boots he'd gotten from the orcs had been joined by a couple more pieces of orcish leather armor, with a better armor rating than the goblin stuff. He'd picked it up after they'd turned Rothorp over to the goblins, and as soon as he'd gotten around to evaluating it, he'd swapped it into his current worn armor. If he could get some studded leather made, though, he thought it would probably be an improvement. "If I can just get the leather worker to make the base pieces, I bet Delgar can make me metal studs and put them in place," he thought. He filed the idea in his mental list, bumping the cows to a much higher priority than he'd had them at, when he realized that the leather worker selling properly worked leather pieces would actually generate taxes as well. Tiana came in then, and he stopped thinking about all the things he'd done and still had to do as a smile spread across his face. When she came and sat down at the table with him, he tried to give her all his attention, since he had a sneaking feeling that he'd been ignoring her almost as much as Lucky the past few days. Her face was flushed, and she asked the server for a mug of water first when she sat down. "It is so hot out there right now," she said. Eddie nodded. "Yeah, I noticed it warming up a few days back and asked some of the locals. They told me it's almost summertime. Evidently, this area can grow crops year-round, but they still have a fair bit of temperature fluctuation. Only time they see snow is when it's on the peaks of the Hammertop Mountains, never in person." "Well, I hope it doesn't get much hotter than it is now," she replied. Eddie shrugged. "No clue, but they did agree that it was getting warm, so maybe?" She shook her head and drained her mug before catching the server's attention and asking it to be refilled with ale. "I hope so," she said. "I suppose I might adjust, but it'd be awfully uncomfortable doing that."